If you'd told me 10 years ago that I'd own one of the fastest growing marketing firms in Dallas, I probably would have laughed. Mostly because back then, I couldn't even afford gas to get to my job interviews. But that wasn't the part that stung the most. The part that really dug into my bones was her voice, soft, sweet, and sharp as glass. "You'll never make it in this industry, Claire. You're just not cut out for it." Those words came from my first boss, Melissa Grant. She was the kind of woman you looked at and thought, she's got it all together. Designer suits, that perfect wavy blonde hair, even her coffee order sounded like success. I was 23, straight out of college, eager, naive, and honestly, hungry to prove myself. I still remember that office. The smell of burnt coffee, the hum of fluorescent lights. The place felt like an endless hallway of glass doors and fake smiles. I worked as an assistant, fetching reports, printing presentations, staying late because I thought that's what paying your dues meant. But Melissa, she had a way of making me feel small. It wasn't the yelling kind of boss. She never raised her voice. No, it was quieter. She'd look over my work, tilt her head, and say, "You tried your best, didn't you?" That's the kind of sentence that sounds kind on the surface, but cuts deep once you realize it's not a compliment. At first, I thought she was right. Maybe I wasn't good enough. Maybe I didn't have that natural confidence, that perfect presentation style. But then something started to change. One night, around 9 p.m., I was still in the office finishing slides for a campaign she'd take credit for the next morning. Everyone else had gone home. The cleaning crew was in. I was running on vending machine coffee and stale crackers. That's when I overheard her talking to one of the executives as they left the boardroom. "She's got potential, that Claire girl." She laughed softly. "Potential doesn't pay the bills. She's harmless. Good for the grunt work." I remember sitting there, frozen, my fingers still on the keyboard, my throat tight. It's like the air got sucked out of the room. That night, something snapped in me. Not in an angry, vengeful way, more like a quiet realization. I couldn't keep letting other people define my worth. So I started to learn. Really learn. Every night after work, I'd watch tutorials, read marketing strategy books, study analytics. I built mock campaigns for imaginary clients. I learned how to write ad copy that made people feel something. Melissa didn't notice, at least not at first. But when one of my mock ideas accidentally got left in a shared drive and a client loved it, suddenly everyone noticed. Everyone except her. She called me into her office, shut the door, and said, "Next time you want to get creative, Claire, maybe check with me first." That's when I knew I wasn't going to grow there. A few weeks later, I turned in my 2 weeks' notice. She smiled that same tight-lipped smile and said, "Good luck out there. The world's a lot harder than it looks." She meant it as a warning. I took it as motivation. The next few years were a blur of struggle. Freelance jobs, rejected proposals, sleepless nights. There were days when I couldn't even afford groceries, and I'd sit in my tiny apartment, praying quietly, "God, if I'm not meant to do this, please show me." But somehow, every single time I thought about giving up, something small would happen. A client referral, a kind review, a check that came through just in time. Looking back, I think that's what faith really looks like. Not loud miracles, but quiet nudges that keep you moving forward. By year 5, my business started to find its rhythm. I had a small team, loyal clients, and a growing reputation. And then came the day that changed everything. We just landed a huge corporate account, our biggest yet. I decided to expand. That meant hiring more staff, opening a second office, building something sustainable. I put out a few job listings. I'll never forget the morning my assistant brought me a stack of resumes. I was sipping coffee, scanning through names, when one made my hand freeze. Melissa Grant. I almost spilled my coffee. At first, I thought maybe it was a coincidence, but then I opened the cover letter. It was her. Same poised tone, same careful wording. She'd apparently been let go from her firm after a merger. She was looking for a senior strategy role at my company. For a long minute, I just sat there staring at her name on the page. I could almost hear her voice again. "You'll never make it in this industry, Claire." And yet, here I was, reading her application. I wish I could say I felt triumphant, that I smirked and whispered, "Well, well, well." But honestly, I just felt conflicted. The next few days, I couldn't stop thinking about it. Should I bring her in for an interview? Should I confront her? Or maybe just ignore it and move on? My operations manager, Julia, noticed my silence. "You okay?" she asked. I handed her the resume. She read the name, raised her eyebrows. "Wait, the Melissa Grant?" "Yeah," I said quietly. "Oh, Claire, this is poetic justice." I smiled weakly. Feels more like poetic confusion. That night, I lay awake, replaying everything. The way she dismissed me, the way I'd struggled, but also the lessons I learned because of it. I kept thinking about grace, what it really means to forgive someone who never apologized. By morning, I made a decision. We invited her in for an interview. She walked into the conference room looking exactly as I remembered, impeccable, polished, confident, but there was something different in her eyes, a flicker of maybe weariness. She said, "Claire, it's been a long time." "Yes, it has," I replied, shaking her hand. She glanced around. "You've built quite a company." "Thank you," I said softly. "Have a seat." We went through the motions, the small talk, the resume highlights, her experience, but beneath it all, I could feel the tension, unspoken but thick in the air. Halfway through, she paused and said, "You've really made a name for yourself. Congratulations." There was sincerity in her voice. It threw me off. I nodded. "Thank you, Melissa." When the interview ended, I walked her to the elevator. She turned to me and said, "You've done well, Claire. I'm proud of you." It was the first time I'd ever heard those words from her. And maybe that's why what came next felt so heavy. Because 2 days later, when it came time to make the final hiring decision, her name was on the list. And I had to choose mercy or memory. I didn't make the decision right away. I told HR we needed to revisit final candidates. But really, I just needed to breathe. I went for a walk that night, down Main Street where the old coffee shop still had its string lights up. The cool Texas air carried that faint scent of rain and asphalt. I watched people laugh, rushing in and out of restaurants, and wondered how many of them were walking around with ghosts from their past, sitting in their inbox like I was. I pulled out my phone, scrolled through old photos. There was one of me at 23, holding a chipped mug, eyes red from crying after Melissa told me I wasn't leadership material. I stared at that girl and whispered, "You made it." But did I really? Because now that I had power, the kind she once had, I didn't know what to do with it. The next morning, I came in early. The sun was just hitting the office windows, scattering gold across the desks. I stood in the doorway of our main conference room, the same one she'd sat in 2 days before. I could almost see her there, crossing her legs, speaking with that perfect poise. Julia came in a few minutes later, holding her latte. "So," she said, "have you decided?" "I don't know," I admitted. "She's qualified, more than qualified. But she made your life miserable." "Yeah," I whispered. Julia leaned against the wall. "Then don't hire her. Simple." I sighed. "It's not simple. What if this is some kind of test? What if this is my chance to what? Be the bigger person? she asked gently. I looked out the window. Maybe. That afternoon, I sat down to draft the email. My fingers hovered over the keyboard, but every sentence sounded wrong. We've decided to move in a different direction. Thank you for your interest. All the usual corporate language that means no. But I couldn't hit send. Not yet. Instead, I picked up my phone and called her. She answered on the second ring. Claire, she said, her voice careful. I wasn't expecting to hear from you directly. I know. I just wanted to thank you for coming in. There was a pause. Of course. You've built something remarkable. You should be proud. Melissa, I said, hesitating. Can I ask you something? Of course. When you told me years ago that I'd never make it, did you mean it? The silence on the line was long enough for me to wonder if she'd hung up. Then she sighed. You remember that? I remember everything. I shouldn't have said that, she said softly. Back then, I was harsh, competitive, maybe even threatened. You reminded me of myself when I first started, and I think I didn't like seeing that version of me anymore. Her voice cracked a little, and it startled me. I've had a lot of time to think since then. Losing that job last year, well, it humbled me. I realize now that I burned bridges I didn't need to. I swallowed hard. We all make mistakes. You do. But not everyone gets a chance to make them right. When we hung up, I just sat there. Her words felt heavy, but honest. I wanted to believe her, but something inside me still whispered, be careful. Later that week, the hiring committee met. We went through all the candidates one by one. Melissa's name came up, and everyone agreed. She was perfect for the role. Experienced, capable, connected. Julia looked at me. Final call's yours. I looked around the room. My team, my company, my responsibility. I said, let me sleep on it. That night, I couldn't sleep at all. I made tea, sat by the window, and thought about forgiveness. It's funny how it sounds so noble in theory, but in practice, it's messy. It's not about pretending the hurt didn't happen. It's about deciding what you'll do with it. I prayed quietly. God, help me see this through your eyes, not mine. By morning, I had my answer. I walked into the office, printed out the final hiring list, and called HR. Remove Melissa Grant's name from the candidate pool. Are you sure? They asked. Yes, I said. I'm sure. After I hung up, I stared at my screen for a long time. I didn't feel triumphant or vindicated, just peaceful. That afternoon, as I was leaving for a meeting, my phone buzzed. A new message. From Melissa. Thank you for the opportunity, Claire. I understand your decision. I truly wish you the best. I read it twice. Then I typed back. Thank you, Melissa. I wish you the best too. And that was supposed to be the end of it. But life has a strange way of looping back. 3 months later, we got a major client referral from an unexpected source, a nonprofit organization focused on women in business. They wanted to partner on a campaign highlighting mentorship and resilience. The project lead's name? Melissa Grant. I laughed out loud when I saw the email. You've got to be kidding me, I muttered. Julia looked over. What? Melissa. She's heading up the nonprofit project. Her eyes widened. You sure it's not a different Melissa? Nope. It's her. Well, Julia said, smirking. Looks like Dodd's got a sense of humor. I chuckled. Apparently. A week later, we met at the campaign kickoff event. She was already there when I arrived. This time, no fancy suit, no corporate entourage. Just a simple navy dress and a quiet smile. Claire, she said, walking up. I was hoping you'd come. Wouldn't miss it, I replied. She gestured to the table where the project materials were laid out. This initiative means a lot to me. It's about helping women who've been told they'll never make it. The irony wasn't lost on either of us. As the meeting went on, I noticed how different she seemed. Softer, less guarded. At one point, she turned to me and said, "You know, I've learned that success doesn't mean much if it costs you kindness." I nodded. Yeah, took me a while to learn that too. When the event ended, she pulled me aside. "You know, I know you didn't hire me, and you were right not to. I needed to start over, to do something that actually mattered. But I want you to know, I'm genuinely proud of you, Claire. Not just for what you built, but for who you became." For the first time, I saw her not as the woman who once tore me down, but as someone just as human, someone who'd fallen too. I smiled. "Thank you, Melissa. Really." She reached out, squeezed my hand, and said, "Maybe one day we can work together again." "Maybe we already are," I said, glancing at the nonprofit banner behind her. And in that moment, I realized something. Forgiveness doesn't erase the past. It transforms it. That collaboration turned into something unexpected. Over the next few months, our teams worked closely together on the campaign, sharing ideas, filming interviews, highlighting stories of women who'd been overlooked and underestimated. It was surreal, sitting in meetings beside Melissa, the woman who once doubted me, now brainstorming how to uplift others. At first, I kept my guard up. I stayed professional, polite, careful, but little by little the walls started to come down. One afternoon, after a long shoot, we were cleaning up props and half-empty coffee cups when she said, "Can I tell you something?" "Of course," I said, setting down a camera case. "When I saw your name on that interview list," she began, "I almost didn't come. I was embarrassed. I thought you'd never want to see me again. But something told me I needed to. Not for the job, just for closure." I looked at her, really looked at her. The woman I used to fear didn't look intimidating anymore. She looked tired, human. "I'm glad you did," I said quietly. "It gave us both a chance to end that story differently." She smiled faintly. "You've changed a lot, Claire." "So have you," I said. She laughed softly. "Yeah, I guess losing everything does that." We stood there for a moment in silence, both knowing the truth behind her words. Later that week, I was reviewing footage from one of the interviews, a young woman talking about her boss who'd told her she wasn't smart enough for management. She was tearful but hopeful, talking about how that moment pushed her to start her own company. It hit me like déjà vu, because that was me. I sat there, tears filling my eyes, realizing how far I'd come, not just in business, but in heart. A few days later, the campaign launched. It went viral. The message resonated, millions of women sharing their own stories under the hashtag #YouWillMakeIt. We were invited to speak at a women's leadership summit in Austin. I was scheduled to go on stage with Melissa. Standing backstage, I could feel my heart pounding. The crowd was huge, the lights blinding, but this time the fear wasn't from doubt, it was gratitude. When they called our names, we walked out together to applause. Melissa spoke first. Her voice was steady, calm. Years ago, I was in a position of power, and I used it poorly. I told someone she'd never make it, and I was wrong. Today, she's the reason I'm standing here, part of something that actually helps people. The audience grew quiet. You could feel the air shift. Then it was my turn. I stepped up to the microphone and said, "We've all been told we're not enough. Not smart enough, not experienced enough, not strong enough. But maybe those words aren't barriers. They're invitations. Invitations to rise higher, to build something beautiful out of the broken." I glanced at Melissa, who smiled through tears. When the event ended, we hugged on stage. It wasn't rehearsed or polished, it was raw, real.
Two women whose stories had tangled painfully once, but now found redemption in the same breath. Later that night, as I sat in my hotel room overlooking the city lights, I thought about all the versions of me that had led here. The girl crying in her car after work, the freelancer with overdue bills, the woman staring at a resume that carried her past. Every one of those versions mattered. Every single one had built this moment. A few weeks later, I got a handwritten letter in the mail. No return address, just my name in careful script. Inside, it read, "Dear Claire, I wanted to thank you, not just for the chance to be part of the campaign, but for giving me something I didn't know I needed. Grace, you didn't owe me forgiveness, but you gave it anyway, and that has changed me more than you know. Melissa." I sat there, the paper trembling slightly in my hands. I'd spent years chasing success, but that letter, it felt like the real reward. Because success isn't about climbing higher than the people who doubted you. It's about rising without resentment. A few months after that, Melissa and I stayed in touch. Occasional texts, shared projects. Not friends exactly, but something deeper. A mutual respect carved out of our shared history. Then one morning, Julia walked into my office holding a newspaper. "You've seen this?" she asked. I shook my head. She laid it on my desk. The headline read, "Local Nonprofit Directorate named Woman of the Year." There was Melissa's picture, smiling, radiant, holding an award. I smiled. She earned it. Julia grinned. "Full circle moment, huh?" "Yeah," I said softly. "Full circle." That night, I drove home through quiet streets. My house wasn't huge, but it was mine, bought with years of late nights and early mornings. As I pulled into the driveway, I felt that rare peace that comes when the noise inside finally settles. I walked inside, kicked off my heels, and stood in front of the mirror. For a second, I thought of that day years ago, sitting in Melissa's office, fighting back tears while she told me I'd never make it. I smiled at my reflection and whispered, "We made it." Then I laughed, because it wasn't just me anymore. It was every woman who'd been underestimated, dismissed, overlooked, and chose to rise anyway. And that's what I wanted the world to know. Sometimes the best revenge isn't proving someone wrong. It's becoming someone better. Forgiveness doesn't mean forgetting. It means being free. And as I turned out the light, I realized that freedom was the real victory all along.